So there's two sensing points,
Mm-hmm.
like two detectors, and then there's an array of LEDs here. So these are
Gotcha.
like emitting LEDs that are then the reflection from the LEDs is being picked up by the two detectors.
We're on with John from Blueberry. John, thank you for
Perfect.
joining us today.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
John, man, you work on some cool stuff. Like already, you already have your overlay of your product, like live streaming to us right now. So
Yeah,
Blueberry,
yeah,
you guys use, I believe it's near functional um, infrared spectroscopy
yeah,
sensors to kind of
yeah,
detect the blood oxygenation in the brain and to give
for
functional
sure.
data back in real time. And what you've
That's
done right now
exactly it.
is you're streaming live from your brain through the
Yeah,
sensor of what's going
exactly.
on in your head. This is
Yeah.
some cool stuff, man. I'd love to dive deeper into this. In your own words, what is Blueberry and what is your goal?
Yeah. A bit of a background on myself and Blueberry. Uh, this kind of journey started out in trying to find or solve my own problem of kind of inattentiveness or lack of focus or increasing bouts of stress as an entrepreneur.
Hmm.
And I've been searching or experimenting on myself for the better part of a decade now with different methodologies, simplest things as is like periodic walks throughout the day.
Hmm.
However, I've never really found the right combination of things or um, remedies or regimes that really work or give a better understanding or a calmer state of mind or a more present state of mind. And in that journey to try and find a solution or some sort of thing that could make a dent on my mental state, I thought kind of tracking or continuous tracking to what is happening in the mind would be a great first step. And to try and find the right type of technology to accomplish that kind of need or goal, came across FNIRS. And then we've been, as a business, kind of experimenting on what is the right combination of that type of tracking with some form of feedback for the better part of 2 years now. So
Hmm.
yeah, we're just starting to kind of get to market or go to market now. So it's a pretty exciting time. We've got something
That's
that
amazing.
kind of works, kind of works consistently, or we call it inconsistently consistent. So
Hmm.
yeah,
No, so I love that kind of mission state, right? Using functional sensory devices to pull real-time information out of us so we can better understand what's going on internally. I think
yeah,
so much of our thought is thinking about us as complete entities. We're all one thing, state of being, and we are what we are at one time, static. And but it is like like, especially being being a human, there's multi levels of processes that are running underneath simultaneously, and sometimes those don't run as they should be. Right? Like for example, one of the things we talked about on our podcast was when you're in a modern day office space and like your boss comes in and like slams like some work at you and yells at you, your body internally reacts as if like a lion is like staring down at you and you're about to die, right? Like you the same kind of stress response, fear and what's it, fight or flight response to running, stress levels go up. And it's like we've been attuned to a different environment and different levels of stimuli kind of trigger like a very primal response out of us,
yeah,
and those responses can sometimes be out of tune, out of flux. So people with
yeah,
anxiety disorders, people with like mood disorders, all these kind of mental states can happen when our functions aren't properly aligned or running together. And one of the coolest things is being able to understand what's happening to us internally, right?
yeah,
I believe I was going through Dr. Steve Mann's research, and he talks
yeah,
about this being like infield and enfield. Sorry, environment and environment thinking, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
what's going around us to what's going on
yeah,
internally inside of us,
yeah,
and
exactly.
so yeah, love to hear like dive a little bit more deeper into this, right? So you
Yeah.
started this, you went down this path of your personal need to understand yourself and to sense
Yeah.
what's going on internally. Can you dive a little more, a bit deeper into that? Like, what was that journey like? It's been a lifelong journey, or came out
I,
recently?
uh, most of the, or like the better part of this last decade has been kind of trying to figure out in different ways what is happening with myself as a like individual. In my last venture, that was focused on motion sensing, so like accelerometry data, like what does just like body movement mean, and how can that understanding that affect positive behavior. And this one is kind of the next step is what's happening with our mind. How does that kind of affect us? And perhaps that's a better representation or a complementary representation of, our physiological state and our mental state are sometimes aligned and sometimes very not aligned. Like one of have you ever felt that feeling where you're just like you're brain dead for the day, but you can still go to the gym, you can still go for a run, you can still play a sport, and you can still probably perform in that sport. But if you were asked to like sit in front of a spreadsheet or take a phone call and talk to someone for an hour, you're like, no way, can't do that.
Yeah.
But trying to figure out when is that tipping point for people is, I think, a really important thing, because for each of us, we probably only have so much mental fuel or mental kind of capacity each day. And depending on our environment or what we ate, how we slept, what's going on in our relationships, what's going on with our family, what's going on, just even like outside, that can like completely disorient us. Like if for some reason someone walked by right now and started screaming and shouting, I'd be like, what is happening? And I'd probably become more disoriented or whatever it might be. So interesting journey. And Steve's work for the past, like, I think effectively the entirety of his life, most of the stuff on the environment and environment is probably in the last 2 decades, but 2 decades is a long time to do research in this space, right?
Yeah, I was looking into that. Like Steve was talking about his childhood, where when he was a kid, his dad bought him a oscilloscope, and he was playing with it, and as he's moving it around, realized like it was picking up like police radio frequencies, and he's like, holy shit, there's like a whole world happening that we cannot sense. Like, how do you sense these light patterns, and how do you sense these things? Like, how do you compound human capabilities? And it's fascinating that he was thinking about it since he was a kid. And I followed a few other people who have these kind of modalities, right? Thinking about this, right? There's so many things happening. Like, I think I ever watched the show Battlestar Galactica.
Yep.
Yeah. So Battlestar, there was a scene. I think which was the android, number 1 or whichever, the Cabal, Cal. He was talking about, like he's talking about, the character was talking about, this is a machine but printed as a human, right? Meant to be a gelatinous being, right? To experience human emotions, experience as a human, and he hated it. He's like, why do I need to sleep? Why do I need to eat? Why do I have to be limited by being human, right? As a machine, I could I could feel solar rays. I could see gamma light. I could hear, the microwave radiation of the universe, right? I can experience so much more, but now I've been contained. I've been shrunken down in my experiences about being a human. And one of the interesting things about these kind of sensory kind of capabilities is that extra sensory capability, right? How do you build upon what nature's already given us and being able to be able to achieve more, right? Like, what does the journey for you look like? Is it to understand the in self, understand what's going on internally better, or is it more about like as Steve put it, like the environment, like understanding more about what's unseen about or going around us? Which side, what entertains you better? Like, what interests you more?
For myself, or in my journey so far, I think I've gone through periods of each. So like some periods where I'm trying to be more aware or better understand what's happening around me, and then other times where I'm super introspective or super deep in myself, and I'm only trying to self-reflect or self-figure out things. I guess the interesting thing is sometimes when you go so deep in one category or the other, that's where you actually start to draw insight in the other. So you learn or you pick up something that you might never have noticed if you were actively trying to go deep or try to understand what is happening around, or understand why people are doing certain things or reacting certain ways to things that you yourself do. That might give actually some deep insight on yourself, or what things you enjoy doing, or things that you frustrate you.
So let's map out some of your entrepreneurial journey. Like, you said like half a decade ago, you started getting these kind of impulses, better track yourself and all that. Like, what would that journey look like? How did it go from like, I want to learn more about what's going on internally inside me to
Okay.
now launching and running extrasensory company, running Blueberry.
Oh, it just I think just blocks of experiments. That's
Hmm.
effectively it. And try to figure out what is either like, is there enough positive indicators to keep going down that experiment? So, like, for instance, of a failed experiment from maybe 10 years ago was to try to create your own journey movie theater experience using audio sensing and heart rate.
Okay.
Uh, so it was an attempt to do um, effectively like a crowd would watch a movie, and as the crowd reacted to the scenes in the film, there would be a different scene that is displayed to them based on their collective reaction.
Hmm. So it's like an adaptive entertainment then, like, based off of what they like, it'll guide them down like a path of better
But
understanding.
you as a person could go see that same movie again, and you would get a slightly different experience than the previous one, because the likelihood that the entirety of the crowd would react the same and you would get the same sequence of scenes throughout the film is pretty small. So you could end up with, I think, the
So what was that?
250. Yeah.
So what did that look like? Did you go out and film like a bunch of different content and like try to like get a framework to show it differently? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, so that one actually never made it past the what I would call like super MVP stage. And what I mean by that, we had like a microphone and a sensor that like tracked some like rudimentary physiological state, and then like a folder with video files that would change based on some like rudimentary classification. That was like the extent from the technology side. We went, the team I was working with on that, we were trying to get, there's like an Ontario new media funding grant.
Mm.
And that was like our thought process of how we were going to fund like actually making a film and making, some sort of thing for 20 people to try.
Yeah.
Uh, the feedback that we got were like, "What on earth are you guys talking about? We want to make we want to make an interactive web page. That's what we want to do for like advanced media." So that was a fun experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Did they qualify you? Like, what happened there? Like,
Oh no, it just it didn't go through. The feedback was like, "Go try and find some private investors to fund
ah,
this," kind of thing. Like, go find whoever. Yeah. So we just,
that's actually
yeah,
hilarious. Yeah,
wrapped it up.
because
Um,
if it was 10 years ago, like you're in Toronto, right?
yeah.
Um,
Yep.
10 years ago in Toronto, like the innovation landscape was so different. Like there was no real support there for it nor to go to. So it makes sense you'd go for like a media standpoint because there's infrastructure there to support media and like artists, but yet no infrastructure then to support entrepreneurship or even tech entrepreneurs. Like, what do you do then? Right?
So, there was the digital media zone,
Mm.
um, and it was just like this free form floor at Ryerson. I remember, like, I spent maybe 6 months there with a few other entrepreneurs or tech people. And it was just like, do whatever you want. There's
Yeah.
no rules.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, good times.
Yeah. So the
Yeah, it's a
DMZ has
good time.
definitely changed from that. Like they're now more focused, they're like more focused streams. I went through a similar experience with the hub at the University of Toronto at Scarborough, and
Okay.
it's the same thing. Apparently the the director says like the day he opened his doors, I was the first person who knocked, saying like, "What is this?"
Yeah.
Because I launched three companies in university. First two with no real support. That kind of blew up my face.
Right.
And the third one, I'm like, I need someone to fucking to guide me through this, right? And I'm like, when I heard the university has like a incubator, like, for business to start, I didn't even know what that meant. I'm like, give me something, give me some resource, and you just sign up, and it's like here you go, here's a space that's meant just for you to go and create what you want, and if you and the whole point of this is to create a business around some cool thing that you're inventing, and it's
Yeah.
free form. You can switch it around, pivot, but they'll give you resources. And I'm like, yo, this is a playground for like someone who likes building things,
Yeah.
right? What was that
Yeah.
like for you? Like, were you an entrepreneur at heart always? Have you tried? Have you built any companies previously?
Um, I when I was young, I more just experimented. Like I remember picking stocks with my dad. Like that was probably the most like business-oriented entrepreneurial thing doing when I was a kid.
Gotcha.
Other than that, it was like building websites and that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
That's not uh, no super aggressive like, oh, I'm gonna go vape this product when I'm like 12 and sell it. I'm gonna make what I like, and whatever happens
Yeah.
to them happens to them. If people want to use it, great. If people don't, well, I maybe used it for like a week and then never used it again. Um, I think the entrepreneurship side more came at the end of high school and university. I started to take on like
Mm.
more responsibility in different areas, like first job, first paid jobs, and started to be like, man, what is going on with like these like levels of management? What is really going on here? This doesn't make sense. There's
Mhm.
got to be a better way or like a different way.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to have like a couple of mentors through some of the co-op jobs that I had in university,
Hmm.
and that I think really shaped a lot of the foundation for what I thought entrepreneurship could be,
Hmm.
or think through like different experiments or willingness, risk propensity, that sort of stuff.
Hmm. Hmm. I went to I was at a talk once at a high school, and they asked me, it's like, why entrepreneurship? Why should you go into entrepreneurship, right? And I said, like, the real world is just like high school. You never escape it, except the people you don't like have power over you.
Yep,
And just like
zero
everyone just
power.
gone, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like entrepreneurship really, it's about freedom, right? Trying to build your own, trying to build a process and like a culture that you can ingrain and build yourself.
Yep,
But like on top of that is working on things that you really care about and passionate about,
yep,
right?
yep.
So going back to this, man, like we're seeing all these like charts and things moving on the screen.
Yep.
Can we go through these metrics that you're collecting? So energy, stress, heart rate, mental load. What do these metrics mean?
Yep. So the two top ones are kind of like a perceived state of mental energy or mental strain or stress. So these are what we are like, we're trying to get the model to work properly. And basically, it's a machine learned model that when a person tags, like I'm in a low energy state or a high energy state or low stress or high stress state, we take the sensor data and then we try to predict which of those two states the person is in and then give a score based on that range. So you'll
Hmm.
see it fluctuate a lot because basically this model is reacting to one side or the other of what you're on. And we're definitely not there yet in having it be like super accurate or super consistent. The bottom two, heart rate and mental load, those are more like absolute units of measure. So the heart rate is just picking up because this is blood flow, it's pulse or number of kind of beats per minute that are occurring. And then the mental load is change in oxygenation that occurs. So every 5 to 20 to 30 seconds, your brain will like activate, or different parts of your brain activates. And then there's a different level of response or oxygenated response based on the effort or the exertion, like oxygen requirement. So you'll get like this basically, like the waveform is like whoop, higher, or it'll be like whoop, lower based on how much oxygen chain occurs. And this mental load is just basically showing a percent relative of how much change occurred in that kind of short period of time.
Now, is this all from one sensor or is it a multitude of sensors?
So it is this little pod. So there's two sensing points,
Hmm.
like two detectors, and then there's an array of LEDs here. So these are like
Gotcha.
emitting LEDs that are then the reflection from the LEDs is being picked up by the two detectors.
So these are infrared LEDs.
So there's
Infrared.
two infrared. So there's two. Yeah. So there's the bottom two
Yeah.
are infrared, and then there's one red, or like it's on like the visible spectrum.
Gotcha. Cool. So those things work together, right? They capture the oxygenation level in the brain. Now, is that localized to one particular area in the brain? Is it like a wide scoping? Like where does it go?
Oh yeah, super localized. Like so, it's only picking up like the temporal lobe region ish. It's so hard to be exact on the autonomy of a person's brain and body, especially across like hundreds, thousands of people. But this side of the brain, maybe it's the anterior temporal lobe, or maybe it's the inferior frontal gyrus, or maybe it's the cross section between the two, or the temporal lobe. It's the left side of the brain, roughly here, pretty much focused on language processing. That's most of the neuroscience research, I guess, from the literature reviews that we've done, have shown that there is some level of activation that occurs here in language-oriented tasks. So if you're talking to someone, writing, reading, things like this, you'll get certain levels of activation that occur.
So is that going for those with the Broca's area, the language component areas? Is that what it's targeted at?
I mean, but to get exactly what region, it's a sensor that is like, we're not doing a medical grade device.
Gotcha. So it's just
there's gonna be
yeah. So it's not targeting any one specific region, but is unidirectional to an area. So how based off of that, are you extrapolating, based off of that region and the oxidation in that region, you're extrapolating that's how the rest of the brain is functioning, or that's what your levels are?
Yeah. So that's how these perceived states are based, or we're extrapolating those states based on the context that the person is doing something in a language-oriented state. They could become quite obscure or deviate quite quickly if you're like, oh, I'm going to put it here and I'm going to go do exercise routines, but we're not monitoring the motor cortex, so we're not seeing like your physiological response to the exercise routines.
Yeah.
So
no, that's really cool. So I guess like I'm nerding out about this because one of the cool things about this, I haven't done too much research into measuring the blood oxygenation in the brain. Like I know there's a lot of research in the glucose levels. Measuring glucose levels in the brain you can also track how the brain is being used, and that's generally what's been done in the wide scoping machines, the bigger machines. But it makes sense. I mean, if you're using glucose, you're also using oxygen to process the glucose, so it works hand in hand. So I think that's really cool that you found a way to miniaturize a device that can just measure, without having to come in contact with it, without any kind of surgery or anything like that. You can measure this stuff in real time, right? Now, I mean, that's quite a curve. Like I think this kind of technology is about 30, 40 years old now, and now it's miniaturized to the point where you can just wear it, on the side of your head. That's wild.
Yeah, and it only gets smaller. We should be able to pretty confidently, with the right capital, we'll probably be able to go another 50% smaller. So
50% smaller. Yeah, I mean, does Moore's law come into effect here? Like, does it, every 2 years, 4 years, or something? Like, does it miniaturize? It's going
well, interestingly enough, there will be like a plateau, and the plateau is effectively like this thickness of an eyeglass. And the reason for that is the distance from the emitters to the detectors is what enables kind of that deeper tissue measurement. So you do have to have a certain length to actually start to get reflection that is deeper tissue penetration. So like the length will probably always remain, but maybe the width, or it'll get thinner and thinner. But it's also pretty hard to say, okay, well, we're exactly sensing. Maybe it'll become like a camera or something for your brain to have like an array of detectors or what have you.
Like imagine I'm just imagine a day when it's like a sticker, it's like put on your temple and just giving you this feedback data, right? Do you manufacture the sensors?
Yep, everything is actually built in Toronto.
Wow.
PCBs, we source the components from outside, but the actual printed circuit boards are done in Toronto, and then we build them in Toronto as well. So
wow, that's completely homegrown product. Okay, good for you guys.
That's
amazing.
Kind of funny though.
Why was that?
I mean, because you're it's it does breed challenges if we're trying to figure out things that more expensive machineries can automate or get right the first time, and we're like, oh, we'll just try 10 times putting this part on, or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, has code affected your production capabilities at all with logistics and everything kind of haywire?
So the only thing that has changed is the availability of certain parts from different manufacturers, because they themselves are making like the actual like microcontrollers or like the different components that go on the board, and there could be a production delay there in Europe, in China, wherever, and then the part distributors don't have the parts. So they're like, okay, well, you got to wait like whatever 2 months to get the parts.
Yeah. So I've talked to a lot of hardware companies that are experiencing the exact same issue in different verticals. Like it's always like some kind of roadblock. So it's actually pushing a lot of companies to just build stuff like homegrown stuff. Like you said, like build it all here. Find local manufacturer. Even if it costs a little bit more, at least get it more reliable. And I think that's one of the interesting parts. Like, one of the things, the results we're seeing out of COVID is that with the pandemic is that more localized production of things. So, less of global infrastructure, more of a localized infrastructure. I think that's great for the economy, great for us. But I mean, moving forward, you said you're opening up the commercialization for sales, right? Like, are you in pre-sale stage now? I see the pre-order button.
Yep. Cool. We're taking pre-orders. However, for people that are like super interested, we give them or get them a test unit that they can return to us before we give them the final product. So it's more like, well, make sure that you're like part of the experience, tried it out, instead of just being like, wait. For some people, they prefer to wait. They're like, I don't want the thing that's not certified and fully validated and tested yet. But for others, they're like, yeah, I don't care. I'm great. Sign the waiver and good to go.
Yeah. Cool. How many pre-orders are you trying to do? Like, do you have like a threshold? Like, you're trying to do how many units?
Yeah. So I think it really changes based on the vertical that we're looking at. So like in each like customer archetype vertical, we're trying to do maybe 5 to 10 in each one. So like a knowledge worker would be like one example, or a like a biohacker type persona would be another one. Because you can learn a lot from 5 or 10 people in the same kind of group, rather than try to like promise to 5,000 people and never make anyone happy. Just more frustrated.
Yeah.
So. Yep.
No, that's definitely true. Like, is there any medical use for this? Like, does it like aid anyone, even any particular issues?
Yep, definitely. So like the kind of the neat stuff with the blood flow is that we can start to pick up pretty detailed metrics around the heart. So we are in the background validating like heart rate variability, respiration rate, and blood pressure estimation from the same sensor. So this becomes, once we get the right kind of convergence on these metrics, it might make sense to kind of go down the road on the medical path. But right now we're just doing it in the background and seeing if we're getting the right kind of p-value, or the, are we actually getting a consistent measure, or are we just like, going off? Because it's really difficult to actually get, like, it's really hard to get a really accurate reading on any one of these things.
No, definitely. So it's you're not focusing on like any one metric. You focus on a holistic kind of picture, trying to map out what's kind of going on internally. Cool. What else do you got about capturing? I know before you're scrolling through, I saw some graphs, some stuff is going on. Like,
yes. So like other things that we're capturing is we're looking at like periodic photos. So we have a few ways to like capture what's happening around you. One of the ways is like using a mobile phone app. So like we'll take like a periodic picture, and then that can become like a visual representation to the like experience or the data that is being collected. So you have a context as what is happening based on that like moment of photo. We also have like a wearable camera that a person can wear on the glasses, or with like it just like similarly, it's just like a little attachment camera, and then it basically gets powered by like a power bank, so that it can run all day. But that's more for like the real experimenter, because they're yeah.
Yeah, I remember Snapchat. For a while, they had the Snapchat glasses, the Snapchat
Yeah.
lens, which is
Yeah.
sunglasses, built-in cameras that's paired to your phone, things like that.
Yeah.
Is there anything like that in your future where you're trying to like, embed it into the actual sunglasses and sell the actual glassware? Or do you want to have that as an attachment? You can attach it to your own glasses and your own.
Yeah. So like I guess the weird thing that we've learned is with glasses or with headphones is a more easier understood product, rather than you have this pod that you could attach to things. So like selling it with the glasses, or with like another experiment we've been running has been in the ear pads over the ear headphones. So you basically can wear it without the glasses, and you just have it as part of the ear pads themselves, and so will sit kind of on the temple. But attaching or like having it with the existing behavior of the glasses or the headphones or a hat or a helmet, what have you, is really important. And then if you look on the top right here, this is like an example of the photo, the context photo that was captured from my phone when we were chatting. And this blue orb is our attempt to effectively provide privacy. So we're trying to remove people or screens from images. So there is more, so the images aren't deeply available. It's like a masked or an obfuscated image that's provided to make sure that you're not
creeping on people.
Exactly. Yep. Try to avoid that like Google Glass type problem. But even there, I mean, this is using machine learning, and machine learning is not perfect. Like you can see yourself in the photo, right? So it picked up one of us, but yeah, getting it like super, super rock solid and accurate is really hard.
No, understandably, definitely. Cool. I mean, so this is great. Like it took you about 2 years to kind of isolate this technology, get it up to the point where you are now. You're doing pre-sales. I mean, what does that look? What does the future look like? Like, what does 2 to 5 years look like ideally for you? Right? What happens when like this commercial? Is it become a commercial product that's widely adopted? Do you feel it as a niche product meant for a particular type of personality, like you mentioned before? Like, where does it go?
I don't know. Like in my journey in entrepreneurship, if there's one thing I've learned, is you just don't like just try to do your best to make something that people want and will continue to value to use, and that will adjust based on your own ability to do that. So who knows? It could be used by 100 people, or it could be used by 10 million people. Who knows? I don't know. But like even managing expectations, like the penetration for the Apple Watch is the tens of millions, right? So it's not like is Apple the world's largest company now, or is it Amazon? No. Yeah, I mean like they have like infinite budget to like capture the market. So yeah, don't really know.
No,
Just try to make it more.
That's a fair answer. But I guess my question is, it's like, where did the technology, not just the technology, but like the company kind of evolve to, right? Do you see yourself getting better at just this space? Or do you feel yourself giving like a suite of different wearables that each do a different function, all kind of working together? Like I think like a few years ago when wearables became like a buzzword, people are imagining a future like you're wearing like all these different devices on your body, each of them doing a different function, like a cyborg kind of functionality, right? Do you see yourself pushing to a future where you're like a suite of like of wearables, or do you want to focus on just this type of product?
Well, I guess even if you look at yourself and myself, the only common piece. Are you wearing a smartwatch right now?
No, not anymore. I used to.
So the only common piece that we are both wearing is headphones. So it's really hard, I guess, in the wearable space to try to have like a suite of different devices as like a startup because
Mm.
it's super hard to get even one product right. So from all the indicators today, it would be a like head-worn space sensing with feedback. But past that, don't know.
Yeah, of course. Cool.
Yep.
Yeah, man. Like I've been experimenting a lot with wearables because like I find that the intersensory kind of aspect really cool.
Yep.
Mainly been stuck to different smartwatches. So I got started with like the Samsung Gear, and then that was
Yep.
kind of cool. And then just
Yep.
recently I was testing out the Whoop straps.
For sure. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
That's great.
So Whoop was really cool because the amount of data it collected and showed you in like was
Yeah.
very different. Other trackers were like, this is a watch plus a wearable, and
Yeah.
it has these sensors on it. So it's mostly just like for the function of it, and then on top of that, there's like all these micro apps that can do things. But Whoop was like,
Yeah.
no, we're gonna push performance for you. We're gonna measure your
Yeah.
stuff and then send you like weekly articles and content based off of your your archetype, what you fit into.
Yeah.
Here's the information about yourself to learn more about you, your type of people, your kind of issues you might maintain, and it's very preemptive at like its information share, right? And I
Yeah.
really enjoy that. Like the main reason I stopped wearing it is because like the gyms are closed. Like like I can't really perform any function of fitness. So all it was telling me
Yep.
was like how lazy I am with my heart rate not moving at all. So like that negative infrastructure got me to like to cancel it. But like
Great.
while I was doing that, I really enjoyed that experience, right? Because once I started getting feedback about my heart rate variability, my stress levels, my sleep levels, I started
Yeah.
actively improving it. Because once you have
Yep.
visibility into your behavior and you can see patterns in it, you can hold yourself accountable,
Yep.
right? And especially when you make it easy, where like a device is just doing it for you. Like before this, I'm sure there's those crazy people out there who are like the notebook tracking the hours they slept, the macros that they eat, the
Yep.
like the steps that they take, right? Like there's
Yep.
obviously
That's it.
some crazy people who did it manually, but like
Yep.
the aspect of like automating this and providing a device that does this, I think by shortening the curve, I think it provides that kind of functionality, right? So like
Yep.
what like do you see yourself like has it changed your behavior like having this
Yep.
data? As
Oh,
people
for sure.
using this, have this changed their behavior, and how's it changed behavior?
Yep. So like the two areas that we've been kind of focused on in behavior change has been when to like consciously break in the middle of the day, because behaviorally there is like a point in like our circadian rhythm where we kind of plateau in the middle of the day. So actually adjusting that based on some prediction or some manual, like we look at a chart and then we make a decision based on that chart. But now we actually give a suggestion to people that have these to say, okay, at this time is your suggested like break time for the day to feel better. The other one has been when to stop for the day from like a working context or like a cognitive effort context. So sometimes that's been like, okay, if you start your day at, let's say, 7 a.m., that end of day might be at 2 p.m. one day, and it could be at 6 p.m. another, completely dependent on sleep, diet, all these things, stress,
Mm-hmm.
family, relationships, all that stuff.
Yeah, I was looking through
Yep.
again Dr. Steve Bann's thoughts, and what I enjoy about it is like how wild his thinking is, right?
Oh yeah.
And like like I love this stuff because he was talking about in the future like having some kind of like haptic feedback mechanism where like you can have a trigger point, when your stress level goes to a certain point, you get a feedback, or like
Yes.
when your heart rate
Yep.
jumps up, you get a feedback, right? And like
Yep.
that you can provide like a extrasensory training mechanism for yourself, right?
Yeah.
To watch your behavior and like keep you accountable to yourself, right? Like
Totally. Yep. Yep.
mhm.
So, like our experimentation with that right now is with this little light that goes in your peripheral,
Okay.
and that gives a continuous feedback of the amount of brain activity change that's being read by the sensor. So you can
Mm.
see, are you exerting like a small amount, moderate, or a high amount of effort? And then there's a color state that is represented there. We've experimented with haptics as well. It's really hard to get the right profile for not being annoying. Like it's super hard to do. Also, like people's sensitivity to touch for haptics is really sensitive. Like what could feel great for you could be like the most annoying thing ever for someone else.
Well, is it the amount of haptic feedback, or is it like the levels of feedback? Like say the triggers you set might be annoying to somebody else, right?
Yep.
Would there be a function in like allowing people to program their own system,
Yep.
like create their own systems? Like if this goes here,
For
then
sure.
do this.
Yes. Definitely. But people are lazy too. So yeah, it's really hard to convince people to be like, no, no, you just gotta change the setting. Don't want to.
Could there be any kind of learning function where it's like it's learning itself? Like, yeah, I think that's hard to do because you need like like a variable, right? You need to know what you're moving the behavior towards.
Exactly. Yeah, and something that like is always changing our mind or our body even. It's
Yeah.
always like super, super variable. I think the company that I've tried in the haptic space that's done it the best is Neosensory. There's a professor out of Stanford, David Eagleman, that runs it, and their product is a wristwatch with haptics and a microphone array, and it's right now being positioned with people that are deaf, so they can get basically a sense of their world around them from the haptics. So
Hmm.
there's extreme value there for the individual that can't hear or has dampened sense of hearing. So the like the haptics become like a different way to sense the world. Um,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, that's interesting because like that could almost be like hear sound waves. You hear people talking or hear something, and the feedback will like translate it into like a tactile braille kind of thing, I guess, right? That's kind of
yeah,
cool. But I mean, talking about on a wellness standpoint, right?
yeah.
Um, this like by tracking the glucose amount in your brain, is there a capability to track moods at all? Like how people feel or
Oh,
large changes in that, like like when
yeah.
people go to a depressive state, right, their mental state changes, like there's a neurochemical component as well. Can you feel maybe not the daily mood swings, but like over time, like larger mood states? Is it able to track?
Don't know yet.
Yeah.
Not enough data. Not enough. I guess like perfect example there is Google X recently open sourced their attempt to do this for depression, and they
Mm.
did it with EEG, and they did it for half a decade, and they couldn't do it. So I'm gonna be really cautious and be like, I have no idea. Maybe we'll learn something interesting after we get this on like 1,000, 10,000 people that we didn't know before.
Hmm.
Um, but until we actually have people like wearing it and have the information available, no idea. Yeah,
Yeah.
really hard to kind of really understand those deep mental states of mind or those different states. Yeah, very difficult.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the interesting things, right? Like these large technology companies are now the forefront of medical research, right? Of
Yes.
psychology research, of well-being research.
Yeah.
I think Google, Facebook, Apple combined, the FANG companies are like
Yeah.
the ones like, really driving like the modern approach to how people behave and interactivity, right?
Yep.
And one of the things
Exactly.
yeah, like one of the things that blew my mind, it was like, so I have the Google Pixel 4, and one of the
Okay.
features it has radar built into the phone now, right? So I can just swipe
Oh,
my
yeah.
hand and like it'll change music. And
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
like, this is so unnecessary. You have like, so the so the journey of that. So I've actually followed this for like 3 years. So Google announced it like 4 or 5 years ago. They're like, we're
Yep.
miniaturizing radar so we can you do
Yes.
stuff with it. And at
Yep.
that time, like the device was like this big, and they're
Yep.
like, look what we can do with it, right? Like you can wave your hand in front of it and it'll activate, and like you can do this and it can control the sound, right? By
Yep.
like by being fine tuned, so the radar can do that. And they're like, what we're gonna do is they're gonna miniaturize it, and predictably every 2 years, like Moore's law kind of shit, like
Yep.
they're just been
That's forward.
shrinking it. Now it sits like the radar sits like almost like the size of the lens of the front camera right next to it, tiny ass sensor, and what it can do is it sense if this is and what's going on in front of it, and it has like this near field technology where like if I reach for my phone, it'll turn on the screen to just show notifications, right? It senses when movement comes towards it, and the crazy thing is just for those features, like those very tactile sensory features, like how much money and research this large organization has thrown to perform this. And that's one of the miracles of free enterprise, right? And of the technology world is like what you can do with proper resources and funding. But like one of the things that always throws in mind, so Scott Galloway, he was talking about this, right? It's like the top minds of our generation, like, Google, Apple, Facebook, and Netflix, the FANG companies, sorry, the big four, Microsoft, the big four combined, right, hire and maintain 750,000 of the top minds in the world. The Manhattan Project at its peak only had 350,000 of the top scientists in the world, right? So the top, the top 3/4 of a million people in the world, top scientists, top thinkers, all this are being hired by these commercial enterprises to develop these technologies and things that ultimately is geared towards how to sell you a better Nissan. How to do better ads, how to drive consumerism and user behavior, right? So it's like it's a pros and cons of the world. It's like, we have this capability to like miniaturize radar to the point where it's like a tiny infant little thing. You've figured out a way to get like a functional spectroscopy now from like a large machine 30 years ago. Now it's down to what thing you can wear on the side of your glasses, right? We have these, that's a beauty of free enterprise. But like, I guess the question is like, and this is Scott Galloway's question, is like, when does it become okay to leave the future of development in the hands of these large companies, right? And that's his argument for breaking the companies down into smaller companies. And we've seen that now with like the attorney's office in the U.S. looking into these companies. But it kind of boggles the mind that is what the driving force. Commercialization at that level is what's driving force between science, technology, and medical research, right? Yeah.
Crazy, but it's also kind of interesting because like the recent purchase of Fitbit by Google got approved, right? So like it's still happening.
It's still happening.
Like the bigger just got bigger. So like with I guess limitations or like managed expectations on what they can do with the information. But I mean, once the information is available, even if you're not actively making decisions on it, it's gonna happen. Things are gonna be learned, and then they're gonna be vocalized, and then that like information transfer will happen manually. There's no way to really prevent that, because if you have access to if you had access to all the Canadian bank records and you got to look through them all, even if they're anonymous, you're gonna learn things, and then you're gonna talk about them to people probably. And then those things or those lessons or those insights will be shared and applied. I think that's just the way the world is. It's going to happen, and we could try to stop it, or we could just try to make sure that it's for the betterment, not for some negative thing. I like to think of the future like the Jetsons. Dystopia. When am I going to have a microwave that I could just, or like a cooking thing that I could just push a few buttons and then get whatever food I want? If I want McDonald's today, I can get McDonald's. If I want,
print it live to your house. Yeah,
exactly. But
so
out of that.
No, absolutely. I think you touched on something there, like data being so important, right? Like, because those who have access to it have this like crazy leverage on those who don't, right? Just like, back in the day, like capital was the main source of leverage. So people who have capital, I mean, this is the evils of capitalism. It's they know the socialists talked about. Like, if you have capital, you have this undue leverage on people who don't. So rich and the poor, right? The rich can, one person who's rich can outperform a person who doesn't because they have leverage. Then technology allows us to have, permissioned leverage, right? Like if you can learn coding and if you learn this, anyone can technically launch an app, launch technology, and through that have this leverage, right? So you launch a SaaS business, as a cost of the server cost, you can now, get people to buy these recurring revenue bundles, and now you have a very low cost, high margin product that you can push out in the world. And technology kind of changed the game. That's why software is eating the world. But data is really interesting because data is like compounding, right? It's like it's permissionless leverage. It's like it can be acquired at many different stages. As long as you have the sensors and the capability to acquire it, it can be pick it out of anywhere. And the more of it you have, the more patterns and things you can develop out of it. And at the end of the day, something that's really interesting with your device there is because all this brain activity is happening either way, but because unrealized, it doesn't have any external value, right? Other than what it performs out of you, what it comes out of you. But by capturing from these senses this thing and making it into digital format, and especially with a wide array of people, you can now again sense like how different workloads, how where things are. Like for example, Google with the number of Android devices. Like everyone looks at like Google Maps, and you can see the heat maps of like where traffic is and how traffic flows, right?
Yes.
And you think like, how's Google doing this? Satellites, these giant satellites in the sky beaming down, looking at it? No, it's because 70% of the world's population is Android phones, and all these phones have accelerometers. So you can detect the location GPS of these phones and the accelerometers, how they accelerate and move. And now you have an instant map from like thousands of data points, millions of data points on the devices, right?
Yes.
How traffic flows and ebbs and flows, like the veins of a city, right? And you have this huge data set that's very accurate and gets better and better. And one of the things that'd be crazy to see is like, imagine these gets widely adopted, right? You get the cost performance down, you get it widely adopted, and you get like, a few million people wearing this. The data you can acquire and see, like you can learn from a large data set from a people right now, right? Like how people perform, where peak performance is, like just recently we learned the effects of light and light sensitivity, like, getting blue light versus screen time versus red light, and like, how that affects mood, behavior, and performance, right? It's like what I'm interested in is like what we're going to be able to learn once we can figure out how things work internally inside of us and how the external stimuli work together, right? Because we're functionally machines that are like instantly trying to understand ourselves,
Yes. Yes. Or I mean, perhaps the higher value will be empowering the person with their own data, and they're becoming like that is their own compounded value that then gets attributed or passed on to a business at their choice of time. So if you actually own the information and make use of the information yourself, that can become really powerful because it's your own individual benefit or choice to either share information to try to find some group insight, or you keep it to yourself just like any other thing because it is a good or it is a thing that you're creating yourself versus some like third party is.
Absolutely.
There's this like large discrepancy on who actually owns information. The person that is wearing the thing should own that information.
I agree completely. One of the projects I'm following really with great interest is Tim Berners-Lee, the founder of the internet. He's back at it with like trying to revolutionize the modern internet. So he has a project out of CERN right now that he's commercializing. I don't know if you heard of it, the Solid project. So the Solid framework, which is a serverless way pods that, so apps or technology services can decouple from the databases, so that as a technology provider, you provide technology, but the underlying data gets stored in a pod meant for the user that the user controls and maintains, right? I love the concept so much because I think it solves the problem of the mobile revolution, right? Which is all this huge data instrument is now being utilized against us rather than for us. How can we flip that curve back, right? And the pros for that is that if people are empowered by data and they know that they have it, well, they're gonna be self-train themselves to collect more of it, which will make the data more useful for everybody who wants to get access to it, right? And by giving people power over themselves, power over the data that's being collected, and giving them that leverage, I think it's a very, very instrumental, right? Like it's going to change the way people interact with technology.
Exactly, and change our own perception of ourselves. Because if we actually have that information available to us, like that's super powerful. Like imagine being able to search your own mind and find any memory that you want from any point in time and how you felt at that point in time. That would be pretty cool if I could be like, hey, when was the last time I talked with Ravi? And then it automatically shows up the photo of when we talked 6 months from now, and then I get to see how I felt. That'd be pretty interesting.
No, yeah. No, I think that's it. It's not that's a total recall. Pun on the movie, right? It's not just
Yes.
a total recall capability of pulling that back, but what I'm really interested in is the actionable data, right? So
Yep.
imagine if like you can have like an AI or like or a bunch of AIs that can now have access to this data set of yourself, and these AIs
Yep.
are being tuned and programmed to better yourself.
Yep.
And for the purpose of like how to make yourself better, how your optimal performance is, what type of knowledge you can gain, right? Like imagine a guidance system, like a guardian angel kind of program
Yep.
that lives within your data, understands you better than yourself, you know yourself, and then just guiding you through all life or your connections and how to, your environment,
Yep.
right?
Well, but sometimes our gut would perhaps outweigh that. And that's like an interesting thing. If you have a little voice inside you that's saying you to do one thing, but then we just do whatever we want, or we do the
Yeah.
other thing. That's the so when we actually listen to this little thing that's like, hey, you should, not do this, or you should do this.
Mhm.
I don't know. Do we actually listen, or do we only listen to what we want to listen, not what we need to listen to?
Mhm.
That's like a really complex thing that I have, yeah, don't have the faintest like background in neuroscience or that sort of like understanding of the psychology around like how we frame that kind of thought process.
Mm.
That's like understanding our wants and needs or desires. These
Yeah.
things are really hard to get a true grasp on. Yeah.
Have you watched the Social Dilemma on Netflix? Yeah,
No.
it's pretty good. I think you'd enjoy it.
Okay.
The
Okay.
Social Dilemma it's worked based on the work of Tristan Harris. He was previous Facebook. He left on ethical grounds, and he started a movement around data and the usage of data at large corporations. So the social it brings in experts from different technology fields, and what it kind of covers is how data is being utilized against us, how the algorithms within social networks living there, it's meant to it's there. There's three main functions. One is to get you addicted to the behavior of scrolling and like connecting and engaging through the app. Another one is monitoring that and getting you to share your experiences to provide content for free, right, into the system.
Mm-hmm.
And the third one is to commercialize off that, aka how to translate your attention into click-throughs or buys,
Yes.
into purchasing behavior. And like that's like a three main mechanism of the algorithms have developed to. So it's feeding off the data that you have, and
Mm-hmm.
all it's doing is trying to figure out if it how to drive user behavior towards fulfilling the app. And the problem with this is that again, going back to that the commercialization problem, right? The top minds of our world working on how to utilize technology against us, our data, our own
Yes.
thoughts and ideas against us, right? Is
Yes.
that the data is being provided. We have now the ability to collect information, but the problem is once it goes to a private enterprise party that's clearly commercializing it, it works
Yep.
against us, right?
Yes.
So
Yep.
I think there really needs to be a movement around how to decouple data from commercial enterprises and give it back to the people. Like just like you have a bank account that you own and then your employer pays into that. Like imagine a system where your employer owns your bank account as well. Like
Exactly.
that's essentially what we have right now when it comes to data, right?
Yep.
I think we need like a different system altogether. Have you guys put any thoughts into this yourselves? Like I know you guys are focus more on the machine element of it and the hardware elements of this too. But like moving forward, like the data, where would it live? Like what would you do? How would you maintain a permissionless atmosphere?
Yep. Definitely. I mean, like I guess the high level way that we've been approaching it has been with the mantra that the person that is wearing it owns the information, and then they can decide what they want to do with it at any point in time. Whether that's like the like simplest things are you can export the raw data if you want, or you can choose to permanently delete. And when I mean permanent, it's like actually permanently deleted information with like a click in the app or things like this. Um, but
Hmm.
getting it into a point where it is like a personalized database that is sitting locally on your phone or not on your phone because your phone isn't like phone data is going to be synchronized into like 10 different places as soon as it touches the phone. That's a really hard thing to actually do.
Hmm.
And we'll probably leverage the technology as it comes to market from other companies that are better suited at building a database from scratch that works really well and is properly encrypted. And once it becomes available, yeah,
Yeah,
make that.
no, definitely. Yeah, kudos on you for thinking about that. Not a lot of companies do. But more than anything else, this is probably the coolest episode we've done so far. About this great dashboard. You're literally showing what's inside of your mind
Yes.
live, which is mind blowing in itself, right? I really enjoy this conversation. Blueberry. If you guys, whoever's watching this, you can order it online. Um, Kudos on launching. Kudos on moving forward. I'm looking really forward to this product. I'm gonna probably order one of these myself because I'm really interested in this kind of stuff. I'm definitely gonna play with it, and I'll message you a bunch of stuff of what I find.
Okay, sure. That sounds great.
Perfect. As always, stick around for a bit. For everyone else who tuned in, thanks for sticking with us. This has been great. All right, check these guys out.